Hello, pedal files or tone monsters or whatever. So today is about pedal order on your pedal board. I think you've probably heard and seen a lot about this, and I think that pedal order is entirely up to you. However, there's a couple of things that I think are good ways of working, and that's what we're going to go through today. But at the same time, there's no rules about this. If somebody tells you, "Oh, that's fucked up that you just did there," just tell them to go and fuck himself, because there's no right or wrong. There is trial and error. There's some things that sound better than others depending on what you want, and there definitely is no there is no right or wrong. So what I'm going to show are kind of like the main kind of good ideas, and then and we'll go from there. So the first thing that is a good idea is to have your drives in the front. So you start with your drive pedals, then you go into all your kind of modulations, and after that you go into your delays and your reverbs. The only reason you do that is because if you put the modulations or the delays in front of your drives, you're distorting the delays and the reverbs and the modulations. So you are taking a clean signal and you're distorting those, and sometimes they can sound a bit funny. That doesn't mean you might not want to try and achieve a certain sound and do that deliberately, but it is a good idea to put all those behind, because it means that you are delaying the already distorted or driven sound, or delaying the already or phasing the distorted sound. So it's usually, rule of thumb, kind of like drives, boost, modulations, delays, and lastly reverb, and then into the amp. Now the only other place where you could do it slightly different, for example, is if your amp has a effects loop. Then you would put your modulations and your delays and reverbs, or at least your delays and reverbs, into the effects loop, so they completely come out of your main chain, and you've got your drives going into your modulations, going into the front of the amp. The amp effects then goes out into your delays, then reverbs, and then back into the effects return. I can kind of show how that works on my pedal board, because if you've seen the previous videos, I actually used the Jojo California, which is a kind of amp simulator. I use that as a front. So although we're recording today through the front end of an amp, I actually use this whole rig straight into the effects return, and using the California as the preamp as such. So if you look on this pedal board, you will notice the drives. This is the US Stream. This goes into the another kind of more drive distortion pedal. It's a OCD clone. That drives the California, which is the amp sim. That goes straight into the Zoom, which I use for volume and some other effects depending on what I want. That goes into the delay. That goes into this guy here, which then goes straight into the effects return. Now, if I'm in on a proper amp, I bypass this completely. This isn't necessarily actually only have this on the pedal, because sometimes I actually use the California in conjunction with the American sound, and I blend them through this to get a nice out, and that then actually goes back into the effects loop. So I don't have any modulations going on today, but the modulation would be in here, or before this, or after this, but before this guy, because I'm actually using my digital delay as a kind of a reverb. So any long delays or manipulated delays, echoes, tape echo at the moment is selected, is done through here, and this is only to give a little bit of color to the tone before it goes into the amp. Now, I actually had this guy and my phaser in front here, and the reason I did that is because my phaser has a buffer, so my leads are quite long, so it's always good to have a buffer as your first pedal. You can do many things. You can have a distortion, a boss pedal with a buffer. You can have a tuner with a buffer. You can actually buy buffer pedals. You put that in front so that you clean up your signal a wee bit and then go into your loops. I've got the distortion here. It's not in the chain at the moment, but I am putting that firstly. If I use, I don't actually use it as much, but I do use it for the buffer to boost the sound, to boost the, let's put it this way, to change the high impedance to low impedance, the signal, so that we retain all the kind of high frequencies. I've covered a little bit about this buffer situation in the previous video, which you can see. Here's a link to it right here somewhere now. Okay, click on it. There you go. So that would then make sure that the signal going through most of these three are true bypass. This is true bypass. So it'll go buffer, true bypass, into this guy. This guy is then obviously it's always on because I'm using it as a preamp, and that then goes into all my effects. And we can give a bit of a sound sample. So any boosting, this guy at the moment is just used to boost. A bit of a dirty boost at the moment, and I'm using the US Dream as a distortion. So if I put my delay on just as a bit of a reverby, you'll hear that if you put the tape echo on. You can hear how the delays and the echoes, it's actually a tape delay echo that's selected at the moment, how they're very clean. They take the signal that you've done before and they apply the effects to that, instead of applying the effect and then you're taking that applied effect and you're actually driving it through your distortion pedals. So the only reason people put their modulations and the reverbs and delays afterwards is so that you get a much cleaner choruses and stuff like that, and delays and so on. So if you want to dirty them up, obvious thing to do, put the delay in front and in front of the drives, and that would give you, that would change the tone quite considerably. And the cleanest way of doing it would actually be to take all your effects, anything that you can, modulations, delays and such, and put it through your effects loop of your amp. That obviously creates a bit more cables, but so what, it is probably a nicer way to do it. And if you want any confirmation about there's no right or wrong, there is a video on YouTube from Steve I himself going through pedal order, and I'm sure you can trust his opinions on things. Although his music might not be everybody's cup of tea, but at least he plays around with tone and sound all the time, so I'm sure you can trust his opinions. And he will also suggest the same kind of pedal order, but he will also make it quite clear that it's all down to taste, so there is no necessarily a right or wrong. The other thing that's probably worth mentioning is has to do with buffers and the likes. Let me just put this down, and that is that some it's quite common now to have these kind of true bypass pedals, and that's good because you know then no sound's going to get altered. Yet we also know by now that the bypass pedals aren't a good thing either. If you've got too many interchange, if you've got no buffers, if you've got no way of lifting your sound up again, because you get a lot of high-end drop over long distance of cable due to the high impedance signal, blah 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 blah. But there's another problem, and that is that some pedals just don't like being next to one another, especially some buffers and some unbuffered pedals. And a lot of them are some of the older kind of wah-wah pedals, volume pedals, all these kind of things. So when it comes to these pedals, you might actually have to start playing around with their position, or if there's two pedals that don't work nicely together, putting a buffered pedal in between them might solve the problem. There are lots of these little things that go on the pedalboard. So again, it kind of goes down to the point where there is no right or wrong. Play around with it. If certain pedals interfere with one another, start some sort of oscillation, have some sort of DC problems, maybe, you know, the buffer pedals actually do a good job of cleaning some of this up and making some pedals work better with others. So it is worthwhile not ignoring buffered pedals, but actually maybe having one or two, even if you're not necessarily going to use them, or actually buy a buffer from some of the better known brands. I listed on the bottom some of the makes that I think are worthwhile buying buffers from. So that is as much information as I can give. There is no right or wrong. Play around with it. There is a general order which people use. The other pedal order thing that I like to suggest is that you have your distortion and your overdrive and then your boost, or your distortion and boost, or overdrive and boost, and not boost, distortion, overdrive, or overdrive and then distortion. There's quite a difference in sound if you have your distortion and then the boost in the chain, or if you have, let's do this again. If you have your overdrive and then the boost, or if you have, I'll start this again, distortion or overdrive distortion. The overdrive keeps more of the dynamics. So if you then go from overdrive into distortion, you take all those dynamics and you kill them off again. If you have your distortion and then your overdrive, it just sounds better. It sounds as if there's more dynamics. Now theoretically there shouldn't be more, because the distortion should have most likely killed most of them off, but it seems more fuller and more dynamic, the tone, when you have distortion and then a drive, or the distortion and then a less distortion for boost or a boost. So my suggestion would be to play around with what sound you want. If you want a real high gain kind of metal sound, don't give a shit about what I just said, but if you like kind of bluesy and dynamics in your tone, you might have to do the drive behind the distortion. That's that. Thank you very much. Take care.